Services today. We are a full-service security firm that is founded in 2001, right here in Chicago, Illinois. We are, again, a full-service security firm specializing in guard and patrol services, as well as background and fingerprinting checks, cybersecurity, as well as training. Our newest institute, the AGB Institute, we have our Chief Training Officer, Johnny Tyler, that will go through active prevention today for your organization. And he's had experience at AGB throughout the years in various departments, but he's trained educational institutions, top utility organizations, as well as corporations on how to be prepared for active shooter situations. And he'll go through, again, active shooter prevention today. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We'll be checking for Q&A. And this video will be available on YouTube by end of business today on our YouTube page, AGB Investigative Services. And again, I will pass the mic over to Dr. Johnny Tyler, our Chief Training Officer for the AGB Institute.
Thank you so much, Stefan. It's a great pleasure to be in your presence once again for this very worthy topic. It's unfortunate, though, that this topic is so prevalent at this time in America, but it's needful, and so AGB, as you've mentioned, founded April 13, 2001. We've been moving forward, and as the acronym suggests, always giving back. And so that giving back includes information. It includes development, employment, and as well as preparation and opportunities. So today, those of you that joined us back on September the 19th, we did a webinar, and that webinar focused on active shooter awareness. Our discussion today is not going to be too much different than being aware, but we will be more specific in terms of what we should do as it relates to being prepared. Unfortunately, since our last webinar, we have had many incidents to accost us in our nation. As a matter of fact, we just want to start off with a few quick questions for you, and you can answer these, and then you can even elaborate a bit if you have had this training, if it's benefited you, and if you haven't, then you probably want to pay close attention as to why you should. So, and these are not rhetorical. I want you to really be participating in terms of actually asking yourself and answering these questions. Have you, this is first person you, have you been trained on active shooter awareness? Now, when I say trained on active shooter awareness, we are speaking of formal training in a setting that would probably be classroom, institution, or company if you work at a company, and it would also include a practical drill or application of lessons learned or information given in those sessions. Our active shooter awareness training usually takes a good class can be done in a day. It's better to have 2 days. We want you to consider if you've actually had this, not just a 4-hour seminar, but we're talking about training. Do you possess a legally purchased and licensed firearm? You'll see why that's important in the next question, because if you have, we're asking you, have you been properly trained and licensed in concealed carry? Because individuals own firearms, not all have concealed carry. Some people own firearms for their personal use and at home or perhaps in their place of business. But now we're talking specifically concealed carry. Is your organization, school, and or church business, etc., trained on active shooter awareness? And we apologize for the you, but that should be yours. And do you have adequately trained security professionals securing your school, your church, your business, and so forth? And also, if you've had training and you said, you know what, Tyler, we've had all of those training. I have a concealed carry I had 5 years ago. My question then is, what about refresher training or retraining? Have you been retrained since you were initially trained? Now we'll give you opportunity to think about those questions as we go to the next slide. We are going to deal with just a few things briefly in this in this presentation today, and our learning objectives are as follows. Who is an active shooter? Warning signs. Plan. Why even focus on an active shooter awareness? We'll talk a bit about resistance. We shall talk about growing trends, and then we shall also talk about solutions. All right? So if there are any questions, you can send them in. We are ready to field questions on or responses to the questions that we've already asked you, and you can do that right now. All right. So who is an active shooter? According to the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, an active shooter is an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined and populated area. In most cases, active shooters use firearms, and there is no pattern or method to their selection of victims. Now, this is not an absolute statement. So, and I want to point out a couple of things here as we talk about who an active shooter is. If you notice in the DHSs and the FBI's, the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, if you notice in their definition, they say an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people. Now, I'll tell you why that's important, because you don't hear about the active shooting events where individuals are not killed. So there are cases where active shootings have been thwarted. They have been stifled or stopped because of alert citizens or patrons in a specific area where the event was about to take place. And so it doesn't have to mean that individuals are actually killed. As a matter of fact, we'll probably mention a few today that you may not have been aware of, because we tend to only highlight the most deadly ones, and that's unfortunate that we have to do that. But then also, I want to go to the last statement. It says, in most cases, active shooters use firearms, and there's no pattern or method to their selection of victims. Sometimes there are. Sometimes an active shooting event may take place in a workplace where there are, and we saw that recently where an individual, the man lost his divorce case, and he went into the attorney, and he killed several individuals, including someone who was just collateral damage. He was an innocent person that happened to be in the area, but he went in to kill the attorney, and so and then also to have instances where individuals frequent certain places, and for whatever reason, that's the place that they choose to do the active shooting. And even you'll see this often in schools as well. This is what happens when there are teenagers who are attending a specific school. They'll go to the school. So they're not just going to go to a mall and kill individuals. But then there are those where there may not be a selection of victims, such as the Las Vegas shooting that we are all too familiar with. And then also, I want to pull this out as well. We have active assailants. These are individuals that may not always use, and we don't have a lot of this in America, but we don't know what trend is coming, where they may use an automobile to mow down people. There may be other weapons that are used that's other than a firearm, but for our intents and purposes, we're talking about active shooting. And these will not include the statistics that we're going to talk about will not include those that are related to drug deals gone bad, or what the law enforcement have dubbed or identified as gang related. They will not be included in the number that I'm. Point is, even the appalling statistics that we will talk about later, even in those, it does not give us the concise picture or a comprehensive picture of what this gun violence is like in America. So, all right. So, common warning signs of threatening behavior. Go to the next slide. Okay, go back up. All right. So, we talked about common signs. Sometimes you can identify, we talked about this before, sometimes you can identify behavior as something that should be watched, such as hostile gestures, bullying, meaning people that are actually threatening or, tend to be somewhat rough in the workplace, or, walk around as though, they are the most dominant factor in any given area. Their posturing in terms of how they walk, how they move amongst their peers, and so forth. These are things that can be challenging. And then in schools, we point this out often, changing in behavior, and these probably should be separated. But knocking things over, that's a physical violence. But I want to talk about changing in behavior. You have an A student, or you have someone that's pretty focused in school, or someone that you notice that have good hygiene, and they tend to be considerate of their self-image, and all of a sudden you see a slip in grades, the hygiene or the grooming starts to fail, and even the clothes that they wear, different things. We want to pay attention to these things, because these are signs that there's something that's happening in their life that you may not be aware of, but there are certainly things that you should pay attention to. Also, the golden rule of surviving an active shooter. What should we do? So, what we should do when we are faced with these things are plan. We should plan. So we talked about warning signs, and we should plan. If you can't do anything else, and your last resistance or your first option is to accost the active shooter or the threat, you want to fight. But you must establish an evacuation plan if you are not in the immediate area where this is taking place. And in some cases, have to do a drill. Now, I want to say something important here, and you will probably think about it a bit, because I don't think that we do. In our schools, we have what's called fire drills, and it is promoted that we have such fire drills in our homes. But once we are trained in active shooter and we do the initial drill for the training, how often do we practice that drill? That's important, because just being trained in an area, and I want to go further, you that have the concealed carry, once you've been trained in the concealed carry, your instructors, if I'm sure if they were astute as I would consider that they might, and they certainly would have been if they were taken here at AGB Investigative Services, they would teach you, or they would have shared with you, that you should dry fire daily. You want you and the use of your weapon to be second nature and first nature if danger presents itself and you're in a position where your weapon must be used. You don't want to just have the license to carry it, having been trained to receive the license, and now it would just rest in your purse, your glove compartment, or on your person, and you don't practice. So you should do dry fire as often as possible through the week, and then as much as possible you should go to the range, because you want to become familiar with that. So planning is important. Just as having an evacuation plan and training and being retrained or exercising that evacuation plan, you should also do the same thing. Then establish a communication plan. What does that look like? That looks like you communicating with the outside world without alerting or bringing attention to yourself. And that plan can be varying, of varying degrees. It can look like many different types of communication protocols, depending on the environment, depending on the workspace or the workplace, and depending on the circumstances. AGB Investigative Services, we are very able to help you design such a plan. And also, one of the great things and most needful things is for you to understand that first responders, while we want to make sure law enforcement is aware that something is taking place, you must understand that if there are casualties or victims, when the first responders get there, they are not going to pay attention to those individuals that are wounded. Their purpose for getting to that site is to neutralize the threat. So they're looking for the active shooter. And there's a certain way that you have to present yourself because they don't know who you are. They don't know who the active shooter is. And so there's a certain posture, there are certain things that you must do. Unfortunately, and we won't get into it, there was an incident that happened recently in the Chicago area where a security guard was slain by a sworn law enforcement officer. And I don't have the circumstances of what took place, so I'm not going to elaborate. But oftentimes, the good guy can be mistaken for the bad guy. And so if that can happen in uniform situations, it certainly can happen when police are coming in and everyone is theoretically a civilian. They don't know who the assailant is. So therefore, your training in medical emergencies and first aid is going to be critical because you knowing how to use a tourniquet or how to apply pressure in certain wound areas when it is necessary, and your ability to importantly may save someone's life because once again you are there on the scene and your hopes are not satisfied just because the first responders show up. That individual next to you or that you know is in a certain vulnerable place that was wounded, when they come in and move past, that may be your opportunity to provide aid to someone. Once again, this requires strict training, and AGB Investigative Services, we are well able, capable, and willing to provide that for you. Then we asked the next question was, why focus on active shooter awareness training? Well, we focus on active shooter awareness training because when something happens to us suddenly, there is a natural emotion that where we're startled and fear occurs. Now, fear is a good thing because fear is the signal from your brain that you need to do something. Now, that signal from your brain that you need to do something is only going to allow you to do that which you are familiar with. And you're going to do one of several things. You will either automatically fight, or you will flight, or you will go into fright. You will panic. If you're untrained, typically without any training, that fright is panic. But if you're trained, then you should fall back on the reflection of the training that you've had. Even though you feel anxious, you'll be in a position to recall what you have learned. If you're untrained, you'll fall into disbelief. Is this really happening? If you're trained and you have rehearsed your training, as we suggested earlier, and you are willing to be refreshed and retrained as you should, you'll be prepared to act as rehearsed. But sometimes individuals get lost in the denial of what's going on, and that panic causes other overreaction. And so overreaction is often that thing that can cause individuals to be placed in harm's way when they otherwise might not have been. And then the trained individual most likely will commit to action, while the untrained will descend into helplessness. Now, I want to just say here that if you remember the 911 incident where there were several planes that went into the World Trade Centers in New York, and then there was another plane that hit a building, and then there was another plane that they said was on its way to the Pentagon, and there were citizens on that airplane. They decided to take action, and I think, well, I'm sure one of the relatives later wrote a book on the subject was "Let's Roll," because that's the statement that the civilians on the plane decided that they would act on. They said, "Let's roll." What did they do? They realized that they needed to do something. Now, they lost their lives. However, they saved many, many others. And so sometimes the inevitable may be that just that drastic or just that dire. However, there's always a need to act, to do something. And sometimes that doing something may be hiding if we're on the ground and so forth. But I'm just saying to you, in that instance, these individuals were not trained, but they were willing to do something. Now, the next thing on our learning objectives is resistance. And why resistance is important? Because once again, according to the Department of Homeland Security, fight may be your first instinct when encountering an active shooter. And this is said because when active shooters are encountered with resistance, the event resolutions statistics are as follows: 40% of active shooters, when they're met with resistance, commit suicide. 4% surrender to police. 8% of the attackers leave the scene of the shooting. We had an incident recently in Chicago where an Uber driver had a concealed carry, and he thwarted an active shooter situation. He had a concealed carry. Do you have yours? Now, if you feel that carrying a weapon is an option for you, then you want to be properly trained. And once again, AGB Investigative Services, we are well enabled to provide that training. 14% were subdued by victims. Now, this is important because who are the victims? The victim is the individual that left home that day to go to his or her proper workplace, or go to his or her school, or go to the club, or go to wherever they were going without any idea that this situation would take place. But they acted in such a way where the active shooter was subdued by the victims. And this is important because only 7%, about only 50% of those were subdued by the police. Now, when we say subdued, we're talking about apprehended without gunfire. However, 23% of the attackers were shot by police, and 4% of the attackers were shot by the intended victim. So when weapons come into play, you have a different scenario. And I just want to share something with you now. What we're talking about now, these statistics come from 2016 and 2017. I want to go to the next slide. And you don't have this, but I want to say this to you, that oftentimes that these things are becoming more and more unpredictable in terms of where and how they'll take place. Let me reference you back to the Las Vegas shooting that took place, and this set a new trend. This individual, while we were used to active shooters being ground level and in the presence of individuals that could get to them or that were in their immediate area of access, in Las Vegas, the active shooter was in a hotel, and he was elevated high above the crowd or his intended victims. That created a new trend, and this is why we have the topic here: often unpredictable. Often unpredictable. So on November 7, 2018, 12 people, including the sheriff's deputy, were fatally shot at the Borderline Bar and Grill in Thousand Oaks, California. Now, that was just a week ago. About 6 days ago. And this report came to us through NBC News, and these are the reporters there. According to the data or to data from the Gun Violence Archive, a total of 308 mass shooting incidents have occurred as of November the 12th. Now, we're talking this year now. I want to go with the numbers, and I'm going to give you some numbers in terms of what took place last year. There were 50 incidents in 21 states in 2017. However, in 2014 and 2015 statistics, there were only 40 incidents in 26 states. Out of the casualties from 2014 to 2015, 231 casualties. 92 were killed and 139 were wounded. In 2016 and 2017, there were 943 casualties. 221 were killed and 722 were wounded. Out of those incidents that took place in 2014, 2015, 6 were stopped by civilians. Out of the 50, 6 were stopped by civilians. In 2016 and 2017, 8 of the shooters were stopped by civilians. The FBI have a new report, and they have claimed, and they are stating that active shooter incidents in the United States, there are two things that are increasingly clear. First, the United States has a growing problem. And second, armed and alert citizens can be part of the solution. Now that's important because this webinar is called prevention. So then now the operative word here is armed and alert. So that and can be or, because it can be a combination of both, or it can just be an alert citizen, someone who may not be armed. This is why in our training we teach you how everything in your presence, you've heard of the term, if not, let me introduce it to you. It's called weapons of opportunity. If you're in a room and you're on the telephone, or there's a telephone in a room, and you know that the shooter is coming into that room, or at least you have reason to believe that the attacker is going to enter the room where you are. There is no place to hide. You don't have a gun. Well, you do have use of the telephone because it's a hard object, and we're talking landline now, that can be easily detached from the cord and can be held in your hand as a weapon of opportunity. You may be in an area where there are fire extinguishers. That fire extinguisher can be a weapon of opportunity. So, and this report, this is the 2018 FBI report that we're giving you this information from, that they have determined that the private citizen can be part of the solution. All right, next slide. As well, so here are some options as we talk about prevention. The president and the current president of the United States of America, President Donald Trump, our current sitting president, stated after the unfortunate incident at the synagogue where individuals were slain by a mad gunman. He suggested that security guards may have saved the day. He suggested that security guard, if not preventing it totally, could have prevented more some lives of being taken that may not have been if they had armed security guards. Others are suggesting that if there were congregants in the midst that had concealed carry, that they may have been able to thwart the attacker or even save lives. And still others are suggesting that just being aware. Oftentimes when we go into the house of prayer or house of worship, the mind is on just that, what's going on in front of us, and we're not alert enough in terms of what's going on around us. Let me just share this. I did a training for a or at least an information with a church recently, and at this informational, there was a concern that individuals were coming into church where conferences and conventions were going on. So when you have a large number of visitors and people that you don't know, purses were coming up missing, and individuals' wallet, coats, and things of that nature. And the question was, and this was an informal setting, wasn't a formal training, it was a conversation. And the question was, how can you prevent such a thing? And so my response was, you need situational awareness. You do need trained security professionals, because the role of a security officer is to act as a deterrent. And when they're trained properly, they do that well. We at AGB, our officers are trained very well. And we do have analytics to show that when we show up, crime goes down. That's just the reality. But I went on to share with this group that what they should do is consider the entire congregation becoming an army, becoming part of the solution. And that's based off of the Israeli model, that every citizen of Israel is considered at some point a part of the national army of Israel. And so now let's extract principle. In a large setting like that, your home congregation, they are trained to understand that you observe. So you see something, you say something, and you become more observant. Not paranoid, but observant. You become aware. And that's the same type of thing that we can formally train you on and provide in our training when we provide active shooter, situational awareness. Even in the concealed carry course, you are trained how to properly use that weapon. These are options, and these are options that have been talked about in the varying circles, and it's just ironic that we are able and are experts, we're the subject matter experts. Track record speaks for itself. Those of you that are viewing this or that are listening or taking part in this webinar, visit us at www.agbinvestigative.com. See just how vast and how celebrated our efforts have been in the industry. And even now with the newly established AGB Institute, you'll see the value of our training, and that's at .agbinvestigative.org, agbinstitute.org. All right. Now, let's come up to last year, in the past 17 years, 250 active shooters, 250. And then when we look at this year, according to, as we stated earlier in the presentation, according to one source, we have had 308 active shooter events since January of this year. That is 308 active shooter events this year alone. All right, next. So this statistic shows you where they take place. Patient settings in business which is the largest part that does not get as much conversation, but many of these take place, and most of them take place in the business corridor. You that are listening that have businesses or that are viewing this webinar even after its initial publication, you should contact us because we can help you. Also, you have the statistic on open spaces, those that take place in government entities, residences, house of worship, healthcare facilities, and others. So that's what have been. However, the trend is now changing. We are starting to see these things take place more readily at different places. All right. So if you have any questions, please shoot those questions to us now, and we will respond to those questions as best we can. And even after this presentation, if you care to give us a call or to follow up, we have individuals that are waiting.
We have a question in regards to the evacuation plan. How can AGB training department, our institute, help with an organization's evacuation plan?
So the evacuation plan, and that's a great question. So how can we help? We use we would utilize a team of experts that would come in, and we would do what we have dubbed as site forensics or facility forensics, where we look at the current situation as it is. And so first we would do an assessment of vulnerabilities. We would do an assessment of the current plan that's established, and we would identify a plan, first of all, as those standard fixed situations. You may have cameras, you may have guards, and so we would look at where those cameras are. We would look at the type of cameras. We would look at their mobility, whether they're able to move around, the type of lenses. We would look at also the layout of the building. We would then look at any formal planning that you have for evacuation, and we would critique that. We would also do a bit of inquiry as to, once again, since you have established this policy and since you shared it, how often are the members that are expected to employ that or execute that plan trained on it? And how is that training conducted? Is it controlled or is it not controlled? And we would then become thought partners and consultants with you to resolve or to address vulnerabilities that we might see in such an assessment. Great question. Thank you.
That is the last question that we have today. Could you just tell our audience how they can get in touch with you for next steps if they wanted a customized plan for their organization?
So once again, while the AGB Institute is the driving force for training, we're very pleased that we also have the AGB Investigative side, where we have the operations department who oversee our SRT, our special response team. They also oversee the AGB Academy graduates, individuals that are able to provide expert responses in varying situations. And then we have we are very pleased with the level of federal professionals and state and local training officers that we have in association with AGB. So we don't just come out, in terms of training you, but we provide individuals, and we place individuals in front of you who will actually live this every day. You can reach us by, once again, visiting either of those websites. We would prefer, if it were for guard service, that you would visit us at www.agbinvestigative.com, and that if it were for training, it would be agbinstitute.org. And of course, our numbers are shared, so you can reach us at 773-445-4300 is our main line for AGB Investigative Services. And if it's just training exclusive, if it is exclusively training, it's okay if you call that number if you don't remember the second one, but the number to the institute is 773-941-5566. 941-5566. But either way, give us a call. We're located on the great south side of Chicago. And I might mention that we have the largest portfolio. We're the largest provider of community policing in the city of Chicago, as well as the largest provider of security service for the Chicago Housing Authority, which is the largest public housing in the nation. And so we're very able to meet your need. We train our own officers, and we have done various trainings for school districts, not just a school, but for an entire school district. We've also done training for, or provided training to corporate and to companies that are outside of the academic arena. So we are looking forward to hearing from you, and we want to thank you for participating and tuning in to this great webinar. I want to thank to FAIR, the who is the producer of this webinar, who takes the time to topics, and I don't know if she's prepared to introduce the next subject, but if so, she that, and then at that time we'll talk with you again.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Tyler. Thank you for this informative session. Again, this video will be available for replay on our YouTube page at AGB Investigative Services. Feel free to email us or message from our website or give us a call. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Have a great day.